Welcome to the Monday Club, in association with Find Insurance NI, your local commercial insurance broker. This week we're turning our attention to the Mourne County and asking, are down on the up? Okay, I'm Neil Loughran and I am joined this week solely by Irish News sports editor Paul McConville. It feels even more like between two ferns than normal when it's just the two of us sitting here.
It sure does. That make me Zach Galifianakis. Definitely doesn't make you it anyway.
I was going to say, should have had something locked and loaded there to come back at you with. No Cahir this week. He's in Euro, doesn't he? Do you reckon he'll get on any of the rides? Will he be tall enough?
I don't think it'd be. No, I don't think it'll. I saw somebody on Twitter. There's such a proliferation of these Twitter accounts now that have all the permutations and league tables and all that. So
he's going to give me permutations on Cahir getting
on the
in Euro, doesn't he?
GAA league tables. Shout out to them. Somebody said, Cahir will have all this worked out in the Irish News tomorrow. And I thought, Cahir will be working out why it's 20 quid for a pair of Mickey Mouse ears, probably.
Well, you think that, but he was texting me last night and he texted me a screenshot of him obviously sitting in the hotel in Paris watching Tyrone Meath. Of course. Because he hadn't got to see it on Saturday. Oh. Anyway, he's not here.
Has Paris not suffered enough?
As I mentioned at the top of the show, that we are going to come to have a bit more of an in-depth look at Down, Paul. But in a general sense, the sporting weekend, huge weekend. Did you have your England shirt on Saturday night?
I was funny. I was at a family function on Saturday night, and I had the England-France game on the phone, and banging the table and shouting and all this. And then, obviously, as what happens to these things, people start to gather around and ask. And it was like, England are up by a point, they're down by all that sort of thing. But you can always kind of rely on France's surrender, and you can always rely on England to be indisciplined. And when those two things come together, well, it's, only one outcome. But sure, look, I mean, I think Ireland lost it in the first game against France, and it was a great campaign. It was good. I mean, and we'll go on to talk about the National League as well. Like, the thing is, with a lot of these competitions this year, is like, there's nothing taken for granted, like right up to the very last kick of the championship.
That's like the Six Nations this year. I mean, I'm not a huge, I'll declare my hand, not a huge rugby fan, but it has been unbelievable in terms of the way it has swung back and forward and the different narratives that have unfolded, even right up until the last ball on Saturday. But I still couldn't bring myself to be in the cheering on England camp, I'm afraid.
It was very. I don't think even Andy Farrell, most patriotic of Englishmen. But I mean, look, Ireland made a great effort to recover from that. It was a great weekend. Obviously, we had, we'll get on to it, but Dublin Armagh was a fantastic game. Anthony Kakacha in the box on Saturday night, another great
two-time world champion.
Yeah. So I mean, lots going on, which doesn't make my job any easier, Neil, to get it all crammed in and to get space for everything. But I mean, again, you can't beat the big lights at Croke Park, Dublin Armagh, which was sort of overlapping with England France rugby. So I think a lot of people had one eye on both. But look, great weekend. Drama, everything, and then still lots to work out in terms of the National League.
Too much. This stuff fries my head, I have to say.
Yeah,
I know. We know, like in house, we normally turn to Kenny for these things when it comes to permutations, because he's like beautiful mind kind of material with this kind of stuff, and I really struggle.
Or Zach Galifianakis in The
Hangover. There you go. Yeah,
well, second, he's in both, isn't he? Second reference. But
this is why I was rubbish at maths at school. However, so we'll take a wee look at that, because I mentioned, obviously Ireland supporters cheering on England at the weekend. But it'd be similar for Derry supporters this weekend, because they'll be cheering on Tyrone, I think, to beat Cork. If they're going to get the promotion hopes back on board and stuff. This time last week, you remember you and I chatting, and sort of we were talking about the possibility of Armagh going down and Derry looking really well placed for promotion. Just shows how quickly things can change.
Absolutely. I mean, and because you've got leagues of 8 teams. There's always going to be massive swings, 2 points for a win as well, so it's not, there's always be fine margins. I mean, we talked about it last year on the very last day of Division 1. Kerry were simultaneously getting relegated or reaching a league final within minutes of each other, so it can swing like that. And I know you were in RD on Saturday to see Louth Derry. I mean, I don't think anybody was ever underestimating Louth, because it's been hugely impressive this year. But was there a feeling from the Derry camp that this is a game that's winnable and this will seal the promotion? Or?
Oh well, I mean, come in with huge confidence, didn't it? Like on the back of really heavy victories, like particularly the win over Cork. Like somebody texted me after the game on Saturday and said it was a bit of a come down for Derry after winning the All Ireland last week. But that is just how momentum goes. I suppose they went 19 months and 13 games without a win, and then they get that bit of momentum going. Obviously, there was I think the capacity in RD was only 3,000 or something like that. Saw some familiar faces, Derry fans outside, looking for, hoping that they were going to get the nod to get in. Obviously, they hadn't, the golden ticket, but we're hoping to get in. And that bandwagon is cranking back up again. So I think there was probably an expectation that they would not necessarily seal the deal. I think it still would have come down to this weekend, but that we really would have put themselves in the box seat. And I think that's what Kieran McGeeney was probably most frustrated with at the end of things, that it's out of their hands now, and there's a lot of, it's open now to different permutations, because obviously Meath beat Tyrone and Cork beat Kildare, so it's going to be a shootout in Division 2 from Louth's perspective. And like, there's been plenty said and written about Louth in the last couple of years. And I was actually, we were talking to Sam Mulroy after, and I was saying to him, like, it's probably 2 or 3 years now since he first, on the GAA Social podcast, he said about, how, the ambition is like to one day win the All Ireland with Louth, sort of thing. And was maybe slightly not laughed at, but people definitely might have looked at that and went, dead on, And I'm not saying that they're necessarily in that conversation, but you look at them at the weekend. They were without Roy Burns and Craig Lennon, two big players. A couple of other guys. Tag O'Donnell started on the bench as well. Conor Grimes didn't start. They were without a lot of key men, and yet they were like, I thought, pretty convincing winners, to be honest with you. They really blotted out this Derry attack that had been, firing on all cylinders for the last couple of games. So.
And you see Kieran Downey during the week there, even echoing.
He didn't play.
He didn't play, but he was in the. That's probably why he was doing the media rounds last week.
No doubt about that,
But echoing those sentiments of like Louth are hugely ambitious. How much do you think that comes from Gavin Devlin? Because I mean, coming from a background in Tyrone where you are expected to go and try and win the All Ireland every year, no matter where you are in the league or where you are in terms of development. We spoke about this a few weeks ago when we spoke about the whole Tyrone Derry dynamic, and like Tyrone players at any level, minor, under 20,
always believe
that no, we're going to go to the absolute top, the absolute ultimate goal. So how much is that kind of Louth? Is that seeping into Louth with Gavin Devlin there? Possibly,
but I think it's as much just like, you can just see that it's a really well run county in terms of how things are doing. Obviously, they're playing these couple of games in RD this year, but their new stadium will be up and running next year. 14,000. The home that they've been crying out for probably for a long time. Their under-20 team got to the All Ireland final last year against Tyrone. Tyrone, you could see some real top class players and that, so there's stuff coming through as well, and what actually impressed me most about them on Saturday was the composure. They played with the composure of a team that has the belief. Obviously they're Leinster champions, so of course they're going to have belief, but there was a couple of times when Derry did start to get a bit of a bit of momentum. Paul Cassidy kicked the 2-pointer that brought it back to 3 points in with 5 minutes to go. And you were like, all afternoon you'd been waiting on Derry getting this bit of a kick. Yeah. And it didn't quite come, but that felt like it could be the moment. And I think they tagged on. I think Louth responded with the next 3 points, just snuffed them out, just bang, bang, bang. And that was it. It just sucked the heart out of Derry. I thought that was really, really impressive. Like when you see a team that just doesn't lose the run of himself, doesn't panic. They've had a great year, and they're one of the counties, albeit I think their chances are fairly remote, probably with the way things are shaking up permutation wise for the weekend, like in terms of going up. But as Gavin Devlin said to the media afterwards, like that was like promotion wasn't even, especially not after a couple of games, when they had lost.
But I mean, you find that in the league, with teams start slowly and they sort of go off the radar in terms of promotion, but then almost makes it easier for them in terms of they can just go and play their own game. I mean, we mentioned there about Horst Devlin, his impact on the team as it is this year, but he's been there for a few years now in various different roles. He was there under Mickey Hart. He was there as the GAA development officer. Do you know what I mean? You referenced Louth's underage success. I mean, it's not a case of he's just managing the senior team. His fingerprints are all over a lot of that that has come through in the last few years. I mean, I saw commentary on social media over the weekend saying a lot of Louth's success is down to outside people, you know, and even the chairman's from Tyrone, I think. But I mean, you have to go all the way back to sort of Peter Fitz and the 2010. Sorry,
Don't mention
don't mention the war. But I mean, at that stage, you know, Louth were looking like they were making a breakthrough, and Fitzpatrick was huge behind that. So there is a lot of kind of local effort going on there. But I mean, is it a bit of a northern mentality sort of seeping through?
I don't know. I think, you know, they probably have taken bits from that, and obviously, definitely, Mickey Hart and Gavin Devlin did make a huge impact when they went in there in the first place. The stars aligned last year under Ger Brennan, and probably the new rules worked to their advantage as well. Again, Cahir talked about that a few weeks ago, like how they're one of the counties alongside the likes of Meath, maybe Cork, who have really kind of taken the new rules and made it suit the talent that the talent ID that they have. So no, there's definitely things happening. And you mentioned about the momentum that you can even get at the back end of a league campaign, and you see the likes of Antrim now have like actually nearly forced themselves into the reckoning in Division 4. Again, a long shot, but. You know, when you think of Louth, I saw somebody tweeting a few weeks ago about Louth and Antrim, who would have always shared a similar space for a large number of years, and you now see where they're going. And again, I'm talking about the stadium in outside Dundalk that's being built, and you know you're looking at.
Is there a stadium in Belfast being built or something?
You know, there's all those kind of things. But we are anyway. We're getting we're going down a Louth mine hole here.
I don't know. It's geographically close to where we're at.
True, but like in terms of the way things are in Division 1, just like they're. Really, at the minute, it's going to be between Dublin and Armagh. Armagh had to win on Saturday night.
They did, and that's probably what got them over the line in the end. I mean, although Dublin obviously do need the league points as well, but it was an absolute barnstorm in the second half from Armagh, and you know we had a lot of that. We had all the issues at half time or before half time, and sort of with Charlie O'Byrne's getting the black card for. Still really not too sure why, but
just being in the middle of
getting attacked and stuff like that. So, and then you know the second half starting as it did, and obviously Kieran McGeeney getting his having his say on that, like you know, and we all know Geezer's good value and good entertainment. But I think what you saw on Saturday was the team were good entertainment too, and sometimes you know we can kind of overlook that in a wee sense. You know, Geezer's comments are absolute gold dust for people like us in the media, and we love it. And we're fast becoming like having a geezer corner in this podcast every week. But like if you know he obviously had his views on a number of things after the game, but his team were so entertaining, and they have been like you know, and they've just been coming out on the wrong side of some you know results. Similar to what we saw with Down last year in Division 2, you know, there is definite progress being made. I know Kevin Cassidy said in his column in the Irish News last week, you know, Armagh are 99% of the way there, you know, and it just and a great. I mean, you only have to see what Oisín Connolly did, you know, to know that they have guys.
And he hadn't really clicked until that point, but he like if there's one man who loves Croke Park, it's Oisín Connolly.
Yeah,
and there was a real like it was referenced again over the weekend, but there was a real kind of defiance or anger nearly about the way even that he finished that in the end, you know, obviously the kind of Muggsy-esque run, but then he just emptied it, and it was like that was, you know, a bit of frustration from the penalty he missed a couple of weeks ago in Roscommon and stuff. You know?
Well, if you want to know about goals scored against Dublin at Croke Park, then I suggest you read Owen Mulligan's column in the Irish News tomorrow. Nice so he touches on that a little bit. But no, funny, I noticed that, and even Kieran McConville, I think, went through and had a chance as well at a goal. Paddy Small for Dublin, he burst through and kicked it over the bar and stuff like that. I think it's when we talk about the new rules benefiting certain players and certain teams, I mean, they really benefit Conor because, the teams are defending the arc so much now that getting those wee runs in behind that, once you're in, everything opens up for you, So, I mean, as you say, Conor wasn't quite hitting the lights, but Armagh seemed to have a lot more of those kind of big game players who can pull them out, and that's I mean, when you're at the bottom end, that makes a huge difference. So they've got themselves into a chance now where they're at home to Kerry next week. Let's hope the Kerry people
Dublin are away to Galway.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be hoping. Let's hope the Kerry people spend all week celebrating Jesse Buckley winning the Oscar. They'll come up a bit undercooked. I think Kerry, barring an absolute miracle, should be in a league final, and which they could probably take or leave anyway. But Kerry,
they looked unbelievably good against Mayo at times. Mayo,
but that's the shackles off, and and both teams are relatively safe and probably one eye in the championship. Although Kerry never really have to have any eyes in the championship until it's right in front of them. But Armagh fancy that, like home, with a big crowd. In the athletic grounds, and on a Sunday, if the weather's good, it's it's going to be quite an occasion, So, I mean, they've given themselves a chance. Dublin are playing Galway, so that helps Armagh as well. Like, one of them will take points off the other. So, I mean, as you said at the start there, last week we were looking at Armagh are down, Derry are up, and how quickly things change.
Absolutely, and we've covered probably a lot of the permutations there. We'll not go too heavy into Division 2 because of the permutations there, because literally there are permutations for pretty much everybody bar Offaly as things stand. Offaly are down obviously, but Kildare are fighting for their lives. They're hosting Louth, who are still hoping to that they could get into promotion reckoning. Tyrone, as I mentioned, have Cork coming, and Cork still in the promotion shake-up, and then Derry have Cavan, who are in the relegation mix as well. So another weekend that you can't take your eyes off. But we will turn our attention to Down, because that's what we're going to look at in a wee bit more depth. Because just for context, where Down have been under Conor Laverty, this is his fourth year now. In his first year, they just missed out on promotion from Division 3. Second year, they did get up, won the Tailteann Cup.
The Tailteann Cup final the year before against Meath, and then
Meath,
won it.
And then last year got up to Division 2, very competitive in Division 2, but came down in the end on the last day. And the pressure was really on, I think, this year, wasn't it? When you're a few years into a project like this, and Down are trying to force themselves into that conversation, not just in an Ulster context, but in a looking at the bigger picture, because there is potential there. How far that potential can take them, we don't know yet, because they haven't got enough of a run and enough of a crack against the really big counties to test themselves. Like last year was the first All-Ireland Championship, Sam Maguire Championship, that Down had been in since 2019, which is unbelievable, just because of COVID and then
and they didn't really disgrace themselves either. I mean, the massive games against Louth and Galway and Newry, which again, brings that feel-good factor, and, you're getting into the summer, and we all know Down love to play summer football as opposed to winter football, but, massive occasions. I was at both games as a spectator, with my son, and lovely sunny days. When Adam Cribbins blocked the
Tommy
shot at the end of the Louth, the whole place went, erupted. It's just like, and you hadn't anything like that in a Down, Down game in years. And the one thing the contrasted would be that Division 3 final that you referenced, against Westmeath, whereby, by the way of things, they needed to win that year to get into the Sam Maguire for that year. And they were just so poor, and it was a real dull March night, and it was wet, and it was just dreary, and Westmeath were wearing that awful away shirt. It's like maroon and green get up, and it was just one of those things where just nothing really clicked. And we contrast that with those summer days last year, and I know obviously Galway beat them, and there was you could probably make the argument that Galway probably had another gear in them anyway, but still Down give them a right rattle. They give Monaghan a good go in the group game, so look, and that's a selling point that Conor Laverty has to give to his players, because and we still don't know whether they're going to play Sam Maguire this year, even though that they've won. They've won 6 out of 6. They could potentially win 7 out of 7.
We'll come to that permutation.
So I mean, there's that. But
just when you thought you'd had enough permutations, we've got another one.
But that's got to be Conor Laverty's selling point to the players. Look at what happened last year. You want more of that. Put the work in, stay here, because as we said, if guys end up playing Tailteann Cup again, it could be the difference between a guy sticking around and saying, I fancy a couple of months in America this summer. Although it might not be as easy to get into America these days as it used to be. But I mean, that's the difference. You really have to. That's your selling point. And they've done everything they can so far. And I mean, some of the games they've had to pull it out of the bag. Like I was there the first night against Clare.
Against Limerick, down in Limerick,
yeah,
they pulled out
absolutely.
The bag at the end.
I mean, and Clare especially, because what got them over the line there was Oran Murdoch getting that goal. I think it was Oran Murdoch just burst through, typical sort of style, got the goal. Daniel Guinness got a 2-pointer after that, and everything was fine again. But for large parts of that game, it was a struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, even against Westmeath, where they were up at.
I think we're up by
13 at one stage, and Westmeath came back at them. And
I think they didn't score for the last 22 minutes.
Yeah.
Or something.
So I mean, they've been, on the face of it, 6 wins out of 6 is fantastic, but if you scratch a bit below the surface, there's still a wee bit of work to be done. There's still an over-reliance on the likes of Oran Murdoch and Daniel Guinness, although they have brought newer faces, fresher faces into the panel this year, which has been great, but...
Well, who has come in? Obviously, you mentioned Adam Crimmins, who has been about for a few years, but he seems to have really stepped up and developed in this campaign. The likes of Shane Annett, similarly, who got the winner down in Limerick that day, didn't he, as well?
Yeah. Well, Amit's been on and off, but he's getting the good run of games now. They're getting a more of a settled half-back line, which they didn't really have before. Callum Rogers coming in has kind of freed up Keelan Doherty a wee bit to a more
we're seeing much more of
a more
an
attacking role.
end,
Like he was always good running from deep, and he was always good for the odd score and all. But I think he got the last touch on the goal there yesterday.
Screamer.
Yeah. Oh, that's what he'll tell you. It was an absolute screamer. But I mean, it's freed him up, and he's very busy. He can get in. He can find gaps and you get into. But when they got that, that half back line, now Pierce McPolan started off the league. He hasn't featured the last couple of games, but again, he's another sort of breakthrough player that they'll be always looking to bring forward. I mean, there's not a huge amount of expectation on those guys, but there will be to lift the burden off the likes of Murdoch and Guinness, especially when you've got James Guinness long-term injury, Danny McGill, we don't know when he's going to come back.
Hopefully championship, or so he was hoping anyway back in January.
Yeah, so I mean, and as Conor already said to us a few weeks ago after one of the games, I mean, they don't have that luxury of trying out too many things in Division 3 because it's just an absolute dog-eat-dog. You have to win. Winning's all that matters. Getting the points on the board is all that matters. But if they can blend a few guys in as well at the same time, that's a win-win situation. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the level of performance sometimes, because they are trying to deal with injuries, they're trying to deal with fatigue, they're trying to deal with filling gaps where they need to, and also trying to evolve their game a wee bit, because what we've seen from down under Conor Laverty is obviously the Kilcoo blueprint, that fast running game, very choreographed runs that that we're seeing a wee bit more where they're going along a wee bit. Now that's by necessity for a lot of teams. You just have to do that. But they've brought in Tony McEntee this year. Obviously, he replaced Kieran McGeeney, who went to Derry. And obviously Tony's different in terms of approach. But you've seen a few occasions where Down have gone along, and you have somebody like Oran Murdoch in the centre of the field, or even Ryan McAvoy coming in there, and Pat Haverin, who's playing a wee bit deeper and all. They have not the reference back to the piggery comment, but they have guys in there who can just challenge for ball and winning opposition kickouts as well. So they're backing themselves. That might be a wee bit. We haven't seen a huge amount of the Tony Mack influence, but I think that's probably where it's seeping through a wee bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, just talking to people. Tony McEntee would be well got wherever he has been. Generally, obviously, a favourite son in Cross, but even his Mayo days, you talk to people from around that time, there'd be a great fondness for him, and the same with Sligo. And from what I've heard, it's been well received in Down as well. He has a lot to offer. It's an interesting thing. I mean, you talked about those couple of games last summer, the Louth, Monaghan, Galway, and I got a wee sense maybe that earlier this year that maybe the Down setup, they were starting to get a wee bit tired of people talking about those games in a way, because they still did lose to Monaghan, they still did lose to Galway, and I got a feeling that there was maybe a bit of like, okay, we need to see what we can do to actually bridge that gap, instead of dining out on the fact, it's okay, Down don't just want to show that they can belong at that stage, they want to actually be able to go there and win and compete. And that's why I think there was a big pressure on Down coming in this year. I really do. As you mentioned, that first game against Clare, because Clare were, when you were looking down through the list, probably one of the counties alongside Westmeath that you were thinking, okay, they're going to be in the reckoning for promotion here. And
even though Down had absolutely hammered them in the championship last year,
I think they were 5 points up at half time, Clare, in Newry, and albeit it was a horrible night. You lose that game, and all of a sudden, you're really chasing your tail, and it becomes an uphill struggle, and everything becomes a stress. But they've got out of a lot of those games, as you said, not like always winning convincingly, but they've won. The situation, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is where things stand in terms of their promotion hopes. Because
they're already promoted.
They're already promoted. Sorry, but promotion to the All Ireland Championship. I mean, they are the only team in Ireland who've won all their games so far. They host Laois this weekend and might well finish off the league, winning with a 100% record. But the structure being what it is, if Kildare get relegated, which is a very real possibility, if they were to lose to Louth, and I think Cavan, do Cavan need to get something in Derry? I'm not sure.
They absolutely do.
So like all Down supporters will be cheering on Kildare this weekend. I think it's fair to say. But if that was to happen, this is maybe the madness of the current structures as they stand. Down would then go into a Division 3 final against whoever it may be, and have to win, because they could finish 4 points ahead of whoever it is in second place. Wexford, Westmeath, in second place, and then they could go and lose as they did to Westmeath in the Division 3 final 3 years ago, and then you're back in the Division 2 or into the Tailteann Cup, which is almost to me that's just a madness of the way. Of the structure of things at the minute, what's a couple of points here. The league finals, like, as if their relevancy hasn't been already diminished enough, particularly within a compressed season where we're struggling for space, and you have these kind of showpiece games in front of nobody in Croke Park, but then to carry that kind of weight whenever Down might have won all their games, or a county like Down, and it just seems mad to me that
no, it's definitely not meritocracy at work, because as you said, you could end up going out and winning 7 out of 7. You're getting pipped in the league final.
Like, what's the point of the league then? Do you know?
Exactly.
What's the...
I think that the difficulty for teams, especially someone like teams in the sort of bottom end Division 2, top end of Division 3, is just the uncertainty of it all. And from a manager's point of view, that's difficult. Because it might be the difference between we don't know if we're going to be playing Tailteann Cup or Sam Maguire in literally a month's time or a month and a half's time. And it can make a lot of difference. Obviously, Down have Donegal in the championship, and I know Donegal got beat yesterday, but hugely impressive in a lot of their games this year. And it's in Letterkenny now, as we know, so it's going to be even more of a difficult one for Down. So there, Down would be, if you have to think, well, we've got Donegal in the Ulster Championship, but at least we know we're going to be in Sam Maguire after that. But they don't, they could, they could win the Division 3 final and get it through that way. They could lose the Division 3 final and think, well, still could make an Ulster final and get in that way. But like, I mean, their path, the Ulster final is a treacherous one. So it's the uncertainty. And as I said earlier, for managers, it's about holding the panel together and trying to kind of keep that momentum and that that standard going and things like that. It's kind of like, and then it's also kind of guys are coming back from injury, important players are coming back or pick up a knock. Do we risk them in that game or do we not? Or sort of. So it's a difficult one, because if you in the past, if you were top 2 in the division, you're promoted. That's fine. There's nothing else riding on the final really. And if you have guys who come back from injury, you think, oh, we'll just rest them or whatever ahead of the championship. Championship's so compressed. What annoys me most about it is because the Tailteann Cup was introduced as a second-tier championship, but one of the things behind it was it allows teams to develop. So you see Meath won it a few years ago, and they've gone on strength to strength. Down won it the year after them. Okay, they got relegated last year, but they did fairly well in the All-Ireland relative to what they'd done before. And then obviously, well, Kildare is a bit of an outlier in that they won it last year, haven't really kicked on in the league, but it's seen as a development step for a team. So if Down were to end up in Tailteann Cup this year after winning it, going up to All-Ireland, those games we reference, it does seem like a step backwards really, so it's so, it's imperative that they get there. But as you said, even if they win every game in the league, it still could be out of their hands, which is ridiculous.
I think it's a concern as well. Not a concern, but it's just the nature of the beast in a way. That if let's assume that Down do end up in the All Ireland Championship, a big assumption to make. I know sitting here now, but it's a hard place to come from. I think to be playing Division 3 football in the spring months and then to go into those kind of games like we saw last year. I mean, the gap between Division 1 and Division 2 is not huge, I would say. There's a fair bit of crossover there, between a lot of the counties in those two divisions. I think the gap once you go from 2 to 3 is huge, is pretty big anyway. Barring maybe one or two counties the likes of Down, but if you when you spoke to people who were involved with Down last year, even though they lost more than they won in Division 2 last year, they were sharpened by that experience. They were, they were. You could really see the edge that they had, that they developed through that campaign. Whereas I think, with no disrespect to some of the counties that they've come up against in Division 3 this year, it's really hard to go from playing those games where you're just there's that expectation to win, not huge crowds, not huge buzz, to then all of a sudden, Donegal's one thing, but whoever they might get drawn if they were in the All Ireland series, then it becomes, is that a concern? I
would say so, yeah, because as we said before, like Division 2, take Division 2 itself is the most competitive division in the whole league, because there's teams at the top end of Division 1, take or leave a league final really. Mentioning no names, but they're up in the northwest. It's like, and once they're safe, once they get sort of, I know Tyrone got relegated with 7 last year, which was a bit of an anomaly, but once you're hitting the 7-8 point mark, you're right, that's your home and hosed, and you can almost think about championship then. Division 2 is obviously a different beast in terms of getting promoted to Division 1 is a huge thing. The teams that you're playing, I mean, we referenced Derry and Louth earlier. Cork and Meath have come on huge strides the last couple of years, to the point where Tyrone are just floundering, because Tyrone going down, you think, there's teams going to bounce back, and there's just so you can kind of and Down found to their cost last year. The standard in Division 2 doesn't allow for any kind of slip ups whatsoever. So it's hugely so it's all there's an argument to be made that it's a better standard because teams are just going their full potential, They drop down to 3.
Because of the risk factor.
Yeah, because of the risk factor, because of the risk reward thing, getting into Division 1 is a big deal. We talked about it before in terms of Division 3 as well, although the standard isn't as good, so it doesn't prepare you. Division 2 really makes you battle hardened. And we look, 2020, Dublin won the All Ireland out of Division 2 in 23, and Armagh won it in 24 out of Division 2. Dublin and Derry were in the Division 2 final in 23, and then they were in the Division 1 final in 24. It brings teams on. Monaghan, I think Monaghan getting relegated this year. Monaghan were the first team since 2021 with Kildare who came up and then went down the last season. Every other team that comes up from Division 2 sticks around for a while. Roscommon have been huge, very impressed with them this year. And they've been knocking around for the last few while. They
yo-yoed a wee bit of time.
Yeah, they have yo-yoed, but it has allowed them to kind of raise the standard. And they actually lost the Division 2 final to Monaghan last year, but obviously have kicked on a lot more this year. So with Division 2, it battle hardens you. It prepares you for tough, almost championship grade matches. So it kind of.
Yeah, that's just
so it's if you can't play in Division 1, the next best thing is Division 2, but the drop off is huge. The drop off is massive. You take sort of a player like Pat Haverin, for example. Last year at the start of the league, Pat was hitting over quite a few 2-pointers and all, and then teams got sort of wise to that after a while, and he kind of, the second half of the season, he became easy to blot out of games, for the opposition, because he was seen.
He became a focal point for
but he was seen as a big 2-point threat,
Yeah.
And he's playing a lot deeper now. He's not that target man that he maybe was a few years ago, but teams in Division 2 can deal with that. He scored 110 yesterday. I think against Sligo he scored. Against Wexford, what was it, 114 or something? He's getting that scoring groove back. But is that more because he's playing against lesser opposition that are giving him that space and giving them that space around the arc, especially what he just loves, coming on the shoulder and pinging over the 2-pointers. You don't get that. Definitely top end division.
Like you saw it against Galway. Like Galway had one man on him last year and another about 3 or 4 yards away most of the time. You know what I mean? So he was never allowed to cut, no matter where down, whether they moved him over to the left edge of the arc or there was always a plan in place to stop
But in
him.
a perverse way, from a down point of view, you want that sort of thing, because it's a puzzle to solve. It's a puzzle for the management to solve. Right, what do we do next? Whereas you get into a false sense of security in Division 3. You're thinking, why? Oran Murdoch as well, he's running through teams. That's brilliant. He's not going to do that, against your Armaghs, your Donegals or Kerrys, you know what I mean? If you ever play them, so you kind of
imagine what Division 2 could look like next year. By the way, imagine Armagh did go down and down went up, so you'd have. You
would have
Monaghan.
You'd have a down championship. Yeah, I think you get 5 out of 8. Yeah, down. So it could be our own mini Ulster championship. But. So, you need to be in the top 2 divisions, really. Not just for Sam Maguire football, but also for development. So that's why it's massively important that for Down to get promotion first and foremost, which they have done. So we know they're going to play Division 2 next year regardless. Yeah. But the Sam Maguire element to it is the most frustrating part,
Just on that, on that same theme, and I can't believe I'm talking about Kieran McGeeney again, but I can, because it's another week. It's another week in the podcast. But there are probably similarities in some respects, because in the first number of years, whenever he was with Armagh, they went between 2 and 3 a couple of times. Struggled a bit to solidify. And have just gradually then kicked on, as we've talked about a lot in the last number of weeks. Do you see similarities with Down? Obviously, Conor Laverty, as I mentioned, in his 4th year there now, and the similarities that I see, I guess, are that prior to Conor Laverty coming in, Down would have been a wee bit of a revolving door at times, as Armagh had been for personnel. Maybe losing key men one year, then coming back and then going away. There's really been very little upheaval the last 4 years, I would say. There's not too many key men within Down. I can't really think of any outstanding players.
The best players in the county are playing for the county team if they want to, obviously. But that's by and large what's it. And you get that in
maybe
every
the
county.
likes of Anthony Morgan and stuff, I suppose.
But people are away for different reasons. But you always get that when managers aren't doing well, and this is the curse of social media, because this used to be the curse of these conversations would have been had in clubhouses and club rooms and pubs and stuff. Oh, you know, if only the best players in the county are playing for the county, you know, and that's not an exclusively Down thing, but that sort of points to a kind of like the manager's overlooking somebody, or the manager's playing favourites or whatever like that. Couple of things there is that obviously Conor had the under-20s for a couple of years, and he had success with them at Ulster level. Had Marty Clark in with him there, so there's a bit of a continuity. When
Mickey Donnelly's been there from the start.
Yeah, Mickey Donnelly as well, you know, and we all love Mickey D, you know, for the post-match interviews, and but no, so there's a continuity for a start. And you mentioned there about there was a lot of pressure on Down this year coming out of Division 3. 2022, there was a lot of pressure on them as well, you know, because you had come out of COVID and whatever, you know, whatever that entailed, and post-Paddy Tally era, and that was just like, I mean, I think every
I mean, the year between Tally and Conor Laverty was Downs, Annis, horribilis, you know what I mean? Like,
but I'd say a lot of counties got a bye ball in those couple of years. They were just like every county was kind of struggling, or it almost pressed a pause button for guys, you know. Coming out of COVID, that sort of thing, there were so many other factors affecting teams, but I still think there was a lot of pressure on him 2022 to get that promotion. And then when they didn't and they lost, they went to Fermanagh and they lost to Cavan down the stretch, games down the stretch, you know, the games that they've been sort of winning this year and they weren't winning last year. But in Division 3...
That's where you're seeing the difference though now, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, but exactly.
And again, I mean, I talked about Louth keeping cool heads in those moments, so those real pressure moments at the weekend, as a team who have developed and matured, and I think that's like in a similar vein with Down. You're seeing that now, like some of these games this year, one or two of them might have got away in the past, but they have, and it's been a bit of a recurring theme, I think, over the last couple of years. Yeah,
but I think there was that they didn't get the promotion in 22. Obviously they got it the
following year.
They're a bit yo-yo. So the similarities between McGeeney's early years in Armagh are there as well. The only sort of I haven't heard much of it either. You always get the lone voice in any county who just is thrawn as anything, who just goes against the
Down has none of those people.
No,
honestly,
so I mean,
no thrawn people.
I haven't heard that what McGeeney suffered in his first 3 years was like, see, right, the man, or even halfway through, or even before they won the All Ireland. Haven't heard anybody saying that till around Laverty. Now it's because it's still early in his reign. And
I think as well, probably people were looking at the player profile of the Armagh had at that time and going, we should be doing better. Whereas I think in Down there probably is a realism that, like, you know, Down do have a, you know, good panel, good 15, but there's not huge depth there, for example, you know, whereas you know, it was slightly different with Armagh, wasn't it? Like Armagh, you know.
I mean, Down have added that this year, and I mentioned that brought on those younger players, and so
like Liam Kerr has come back.
Liam Kerr's come back, was very impressive in the latter stage against Fermanagh. Won basically a couple of frees, you know, black card and a yellow card against a Fermanagh player, you know. So he's just making himself a nuisance for defences, that direct running, which is fantastic. But
and as we mentioned, Danny McGill, hopefully,
but the point come back in there is that 2 or 3 years ago, Down wouldn't really have been able to absorb an injury like Danny McGill's. You know what I mean? And they have been able to do that this year. We've brought those new faces in. But with Laverty and the similarities, you know, to Geezer is took a wee while to get it going, as you said. And also the guy, he's, you know, he deepened the squad right back to the management team as well, you know, because, you know, he's obviously got good contacts. And we spoke before about McGeeney bringing in good coaching, and Stephen Campbell mentioned it last week about Kieran Donaghy and the benefits he brought in, and Gilligan and the guys like that, and McKeever, who's been there, you know, for a while too. But, you know, Laverty's brought in, you know, he had Sean Boylan with him at the Down under 20s, which was mad, like, because it was coming out the back end of COVID, and Sean's health wasn't the great. I know you spoke to him about it, like, but then, you know, you had Kieran Mina,
who had a
which was fantastic, like, you know, and that, you know, Downer, I mean, even though Mina's gone, Downer still benefiting from his input. And we mentioned Tony McEntee, so, you know, Conor's got a good. He's got a good contacts book as well, just like Kieran McGeeney has, like, and that, but that's a good sign of management too. Like, you know, you go all the way back to Joe Kiernan at Armagh. it was all about building management teams. It wasn't necessarily I'm the manager and I know everything. Like, you have to know what you don't know, and you have to know who's best is going to add to that, and you've seen that now with Down, and they're getting burn the fruits of that now.
Yeah, and I think you can see that narrative can go obviously one of two ways, but you take the likes of even Monaghan this year, like Andy Moran's reputation has been enhanced, exponentially in Monaghan by not even being there this year, but because everybody's saying, well, with him not there, like last year they were shooting the lights out, and this year obviously he's back home with Mayo, and Monaghan are struggling now. There's a lot more to it than just Andy Moran not being there, but it is a factor, and that is the impact that a fresh pair of eyes and a coach can make. Just before we wrap up, Paul, I wanted to have a bit of a look at where Down stand in Ulster now, if or how you see it, because to me you've got like Donegal and Armagh are up there, above everybody at the minute, and then after that it's a bit muddled, because Tyrone have obviously fallen down the order. Derry, I suppose Derry would be up there definitely.
Well, Carr thinks Derry are going to win Ulster.
I was going to say that Derry are definitely.
How dare you not put Armagh them up with Armagh and Donegal?
They're in that top three, which wherever you put them in that top three is personal choice. But beyond that, I think there's a much of a muchness, isn't there?
Because Monaghan, it's
which Tyrone fans might be looking at going, how dare you, put us in with Down and whoever, but Monaghan, the evidence suggests that is the case at the minute.
Monaghan's the T word. It's transition, really, isn't it? Like, they've lost a lot of those old heads, the 30 club and all, Carl McConnell, Hughes and guys that got hugely important, and McManus obviously the last few years. And look, the point is that they would have known for a long time, because every year was the same question with those guys winning. Are you going to stick it for another year? So it wasn't that came out of the blue. It just, they're not really replacing like with like, which is no great shame, because no county could really replace players like that. But it means they've fallen off the pace big time. And as we know, Gabriel Bannigan, it's got a hard job, like, it really has. And I know obviously maybe there's a bit of internal grumbling in Monaghan to say, well, oh God, he's not quite getting it right, and how much of an Andy, as you said,
it's
Andy Moore,
it's a hard place to be whenever you're struggling for a number, like they're without a lot of key, even beyond the guys that have retared. There's been a lot of
Began hasn't been in as much this year and stuff, which is kind of weird when you think about Scottstown winning Ulster. But Tyrone as well. Like, I mean, again, say Ergal Kieran won an All-Ireland final, and Tyrone's under 20s. Again, like, I mean, their great strength was always, blending those guys into the team. And, Malachy O'Rourke's doing that to a certain extent this year. But, we looked at how competitive Division 2 is. It's probably not the testing ground for that. You mean, obviously, that they had the Tailteann or the McKenna Cup to do that in. Freudian slip there, Tyrone. But, I mean, so maybe that's been, you look at how competitive Division 2 is, you look at the job of a rebuild that Tyrone are at the minute, and it's just such a difficult job. So, like, Cavan are, off the pace since, I don't know, Raymond Galligan went. Did he know that what was coming down the line, but there
just seems a bit of an antipathy about Cavan in a general sense.
The only thing I would say in terms of where Down are in Ulster is that they don't have as much big game experience as the likes of Tyrone or even Monaghan. That's what they're lacking. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say on their day, Monaghan and Tyrone would still pose a threat to them. Yeah. And you saw, and I know it was McKenna Cup and Pomeroy and down and Tyrone, and so you're a lot of fringe players there and stuff like that. But I mean, how did
yeah, I mean, you can't read really anything or too much into a day like that. But it is like that's the big question mark over Down, is that they just haven't had that experience against big counties often enough. Yeah. Whereas for all the blows that are raining down on Tyrone at the minute, and it has been a difficult year, but at least they're in there and they're mixing it with really good teams on a regular basis, and have been consistently. And for the generations that they have coming through, that has been a regular occurrence for the last number of years. Down just haven't had that same consistency in terms of really getting the tests, other than what feel sometimes like one-off,
Yes,
occasions.
Moments.
Yeah.
And then you look at Tyrone, like, Niall Morgan hasn't really featured. Kieran McGeeney's only coming back. Hampsey,
Dark
is
Cannibals,
there. So the players that they have to come into their team of a huge, or that level of big game guys or experienced guys and stuff like that, So, if Down had 4 of those sort of players sitting on the sideline, you'd think, wow, it's only going to get better. But you get the feeling there, well, they are kind of approaching their peak at the minute, which is fine, like, because, the aim was always to, number one, get promoted, and you can only just, they've done everything they can so far. They, do no more in terms of winning the games that they've won. So, but how much more is in them? Experience. They need that big game experience, and that's why I would say, even where Tyrone are at the minute, if they're playing Armagh in the championship, I mean, that game. On paper now, Armagh are winning that game fairly handily, but you don't know what happens come championship time,
Absolutely. Well, I think that probably wraps us up.
Yeah, talking about Down, we landed on Armagh Tyrone at the end.
Any county we didn't touch on there, I don't think so. I think we got round pretty much everybody, certainly in Ulster anyway. Paul McConville, thank you very much for joining us on the Monday Club this week, and thank you as always to our sponsors, Find Insurance NI, your local commercial insurance broker. We will be back next week for more. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast.